somebody went into labor. A granddaughter went into labor. Yeah, she went into labor, so she called and left a message for me on my phone. My phone didn't ring, so I looked down and she left a message saying that if she wasn't here tonight, it was because somebody was having a baby. So she said she would be with us mentally, but not physically. So, okay, getting back to Ecclesiastes. Let's just go and turn to the book, chapter 1. We've already talked about that. Chapter 1, verse 8 through 11. Chapter 1, verses 8 through 11 gives us the first point that Solomon is making. Come on. Okay. All right. Slowly. All things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. We stop there for a second. We kind of get an indication. He's talking about things going in cycles, right? Things that have been done or things that will be done. Things that have been heard, things that will be heard, things that are things that will be. And he kind of gets us into an idea of a cycle, that the world runs in cycles, does it not? The only thing that really has changed is our understanding and our technology. Really, everything else runs in the same kind of cycle. There are going to be times where people return to God, at least on the surface anyway, and then there are going to be times when they move away from Him. There are going to be times when the world is going to be a little bit is at peace, and there's going to be times that it's war. What does that tell us about human beings? What does it tell us about us as humanity? They don't change, which tells us also, yes ma'am, chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. So let's think about that. When we talk about man doesn't change, what does that tell us about him? We don't learn oftentimes, right? When we continue on down the same path that we've always gone down, and we continue to go down that path, even when something better is shown to us, it also Solomon's kind of making a point also that as human beings, even though we learn something different, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to change our behavior, right? When it's shown that something is a particular way and they do it anyway, what does that tell us? They're not. Let's just take, for example, and it's not always necessarily a bad thing. It just means that we as human beings it's hard for us to break a pattern of behavior. It's hard for us to break a pattern. In the church, it's often been said that, and I'm not talking about unscriptural change, I'm talking about change in the church. They said it's sometimes easier to turn a battleship than to make the church to change directions in a way that it's going. We're almost always the last to adopt certain things that are often beneficial. Why? Well, we've always done it that way. We don't need to change. We were one of the last people to adopt vacation Bible schools. Well, we don't need vacation Bible schools. Well, vacation Bible schools are good, and they're beneficial. The idea of having a projector. I worshiped in the congregation where having a projector was, the devil's work. We don't need a projector. We've got this, and we can do this, and we've never done that. We don't need to do that. Well, sometimes changes for the better. Doesn't mean that we change our doctrine. Doesn't mean that we change what we preach. It may change how we preach it. It took me a while to convince people, not here, because you guys have been doing it. It took me a while to convince people that we ought to live stream our services on the internet at a congregation. We need to do this. This is an opportunity. We can reach out. It doesn't really cost us anything. All we have to do is this and this. And I don't think we really need to do that. It's not really helping. Well, how do we know that? It certainly doesn't hurt. It certainly doesn't hurt. And if worse comes to worse, if nothing else happens, then everything that we do is out there for people to see. We're being very transparent. We're not, there's a great many benefits to it. Great many, not the least of which is, of course, people who are on there. And I've had many people say, you know what, I'm glad we do that because I wasn't able to come, but I was able to watch, and I felt as if in some way, shape, or form I was a participant because I was able to see what was happening. But the whole point is getting the idea that, when we say that which has been is what will be in verse 9, and that which is done is what will be done, he's talking about human beings and the way we behave, the way we do things. The way we do things is the way that they're going to be done in the future. I kind of get a chuckle out of people saying, we need to address poverty. We need to eliminate poverty. Well, what's the problem with that? Can you eliminate poverty? No. Jesus said you're always going to have the poor. The poor are always going to be here. Well, we can eliminate this. Well, no, we can't. We can't eliminate that. Why? That which has been is what will be. You're always going to have people that are going to do things regardless of what they've been shown as being a better reaction to certain things. And Solomon realizes this hundreds of years ago. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Solomon is realizing this, and this is what he's writing. And this is when he gets to the idea in verse 9, down towards the end. And there's nothing new under the sun. We talked about that last week. The Bible is one of the most quoted books in the world in various ways. And I've seen this mentioned, referenced in so many different ways. The idea there's nothing new under the sun. And that's the truth. Solomon said it. It was true then and it's true today. As human beings, we behave in certain ways that it's very difficult for us to break a pattern of behavior. He says, is there nothing, verse 10, is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? Now, it had been hundreds of years since the beginning of the world, and it was, a couple thousand after the fact. But we can say the same thing. See, this is new, and there's really nothing new. There really isn't. The way that we view things may be different. For example, television, the internet. But really, what do we see on the internet? That which is already there. It's just been, it's more readily available to us, but there's nothing new. When we think about the crimes of humanity against humanity, we think about the good things that people have done, but all of those are just repeats of things that we've seen in the past. We think about how horrible mankind is to one another. Have you ever seen the way that the ancients used to kill each other? The ways they would devise new methods which to murder each other? Anything we've got is fairly tame. And the fact that the things that happen now are less frequent than they used to be tells us it's actually getting better, not getting worse in regards to our violence towards one another. But it still tells us that there's still violence. There was violence then, there's violence today. There's good then and there's good today. There's nothing new under the sun. We can't look at anything and say it's new. We can't. So, continuing on, what Solomon's saying here. The idea here he's getting apart to us is futility. It's futility. Once again, we read the first part of this, and it's a very dark place that Solomon's in, because he's looking at man's wisdom and seeing what man's wisdom avails him. And we think about it, it's kind of a slog for the first part, because you think, what is he really getting at? What's the point that he's getting to here? Because this is depressing. I don't want to read too much of this. Where are we going to get to the good point? Well, the good comes from what he recognizes here. The idea that, what is the key question? The idea of what's the key question that this book is asking? What's the point of it? Where's the point in all of it? All right. So now, in chapter 1, verses 8 through 11, the preacher, Solomon, takes all of these unending cycles and he applies them to man's experience. We see all of the things, the rivers, does the sun still, does the earth still revolve so that the sun comes up in the east and set in the west? Yes. Do we still revolve around the sun? Yes. Does the tide rise and the tide go away? Yes. Does water still flow from the mountains into the streams and then into the oceans? Yes. All of these things. And what he's saying here is that you could take up all of man's experiences, and you could take up all of man's actions, and you could take all of the unending cycles that man goes through and the things that he does, and when he's gone, guess what's going to happen? Those things are still going to occur. So, in spite of all that we think we have, and in spite of all we think that we've accomplished, in spite of all the wisdom that we think we have, at the end of the day, it's nothing, because the sun is still going to rise in the east, The tides are still going to go up and down. We're still going to go around the seasons are still going to come into play, and all of that's going to continue on regardless of what we think we've accomplished. The old, I don't have it here, and I was going to say, the idea here, have you ever seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul wagon? Can't take it with you. Everything that we have on this earth, everything that we are on this earth, remains here after we're gone, including the body. Yeah, our body will return to the earth from whence it came. Some faster than others, and it's just that's the way it's going to be. So Psalm is taking all of these cycles and he's applying them to man's experience. We have a lack of satisfaction, do we not? What is there about man's experiences that causes him to be dissatisfied? What is it about us that causes us to be dissatisfied? Where does dissatisfaction come into play? Where's the root of dissatisfaction? How? In what way? How does that begin a sense of dissatisfaction? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Anybody got anything to add to that? I heard somebody was getting ready to say something over here. Who was it? Nobody? Okay. I thought I heard somebody about to say something. Yeah. Was it you? Okay. All right. The idea here, of course, is that we're pulling away from God, and that getting to that concept of pulling away from God. You see dissatisfaction in our lives, and it really comes in at certain points, does it not? It's not all of our lives we're dissatisfied. It's particular points in our life where we're dissatisfied. When you're a young person, you're dissatisfied because you're not older. The first thing a young person wants is to be older, and that's what they look forward to. I look at the idea of being older. The other options don't sound too good to me. I'd rather be a little bit older than be dead. But the concept here is this: when you're a kid, when you're it really doesn't get into play until a little bit later on. But even when you're a small child, you look for the next big thing. You look for the next big milestone, right? When you're a little kid, you look forward to graduating from the bike with the training wheels, and you get to the two-wheeler. And you're a big kid then when you can ride your bike without any mom and dad or the training wheels. That's a big thing. Then it gets into you're a little bit older. When Peyton, when she turned 9 to 10, it was a big deal because now she's 2 digits. I said, well, wait till you get 3 digits and then we'll talk. I said she was excited about going from 9 to 10. For her, it was a big deal. For us, not so much, but for her, it's a big deal. But then you get into the idea of when you're 12, you can't wait to be a teenager. 13. When you're 15, you can't wait till 16 where you can start driving. Then when you're 17, you can't wait till 18 till you're an adult. And it just continues to go on and on and on. And then, but it's when we start looking to the next big thing is when we start getting our sense of dissatisfaction with ourselves and our life. Typically when you get a little bit older. My first real sense of dissatisfaction in my life is when I graduated college, and I realized that I had squandered a lot of my time in college. I didn't apply myself. I didn't graduate with the grades I really should have. But I look back now, and even now, even when it doesn't make a bit of difference in the life that I'm living right now, I'm still a little dissatisfied that I didn't apply myself more and work harder and graduate maybe with a better GPA. But then, think about this: I'm not saying when you get married you're dissatisfied. I'm saying when you get married, then all of a sudden there's a greater sense of dissatisfaction. Maybe I'm not providing enough for my family. Moms have a great sense of dissatisfaction. I'm not the kind of mom maybe my mother was. I'm not engaging my kids the way I'm told by society that I'm supposed to engage my children, and I'm not doing for them everything that the world says I'm supposed to be doing for them. And even when we know better, we know what the Lord wants us to do, even then we still have a sense of dissatisfaction. I'm not the wife I need to be. I'm not the daughter I need to be. I'm not the mother I need to be. Guess what? Men have the same thing. I don't know how many times I talk to men my age, and I ask them, and they say, I just don't feel like I don't think I'm where I should be as a father and as a husband and as a son and all these things. In the church, I'm not where I should be in my faith. And we just get this sense of dissatisfaction. And it occurs in everybody's life at some particular point in time. When we get even older, we look back on our lives and say, well, I really didn't do all of the things I wanted to do. Maybe I wasn't, even then, I wasn't the parent I should have been. I wasn't the spouse I should have been, all of these things. But every single person in their life comes with a sense of dissatisfaction. This is where Solomon is. See, Solomon is looking back on things now. He's not looking at things as they're happening. He's writing this as a memorial to the life that he lived. Because at this point, he's realized his error. He's coming back to God slowly, but he's coming back to him. So he's writing this, and he's expressing a sense of dissatisfaction. Part of it, I agree. Part of it, I definitely agree. The idea that part of his dissatisfaction is the amount of time that he spent as the cycles of the earth. Same thing with the cycle of man. He's dissatisfied with where he's been and what he's accomplished, and he realizes that his accomplishments are not what he thought they were going to be, having spent all of his life in pursuit of earthly wisdom. Now, when we talk about the idea, when he's talking about wisdom, we got to remember that the wisdom he's talking about is not the wisdom of God; it's the wisdom of man. Okay. Conventional wisdom tells us a lot of things that are contrary to God's understanding of the world and His explanation of the world. Right? Conventional wisdom says that the earth has been around for billions of years, that mankind has been around for millions of years, and you go back and you trying to explain it. Now that's conventional wisdom. That's man wisdom. Well, we know where man's wisdom is going to take us, right? Where's man's wisdom going to get us? Nowhere good. Sure. Now there's a difference, right, between knowledge and wisdom. Okay. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Okay. I think that's a good explanation of it, and you're right that you can have all the knowledge in the world, and you know people that aren't very wise. Have you ever seen somebody that was so smart that they didn't know how to tie their own shoes? I've known a bunch of people like that. I really have. I always like to think that I've got I may not be the smartest guy in the room, but maybe I can apply it better than these guys can. But you've got guys that they fit the profile. They're the guys that they always have a covering of chalk dust, and they're always disheveled because their minds are constantly thinking. But you realize that in the grand scheme of things, they may be very smart, but they're not very wise. They don't know how to take the knowledge that they've gathered and apply it the way it's supposed to. And yeah. Yeah. And which one do you really want? And which one do you want? Do you want the person that knows it, or you want the person that went to school for 6 years to study it? I want the person that knows it, right? Not just the guy that has the theory, but the guy that's put the theory into practice, the one that's made it work. Not just the guy that knows the stuff, but the one has knowledge applied is a good explanation of wisdom. I think it's probably one of the better ones. And not just knowledge, but the ability to sift through knowledge and discard that which is irrelevant. That is, there's true knowledge and then there's false knowledge, right? Yeah. There's a truth and then there's a falsity. Both of them are knowledge, but one of them needs to be discarded, does it not? Should we be knowledgeable about the word or wise about the word? So knowledgeable means that we're going to be able to quote book. Satan can quote scripture, right? So the wisdom comes into play where we know what we can accurately discard, and what we can take for truth. Did you know not everything written in the Bible is true? Not everything written in the Bible is true. There are lies written in the Bible, but their lies are not presented as gospel, are not presented as truth. The lies are written very specifically as lies. For example, the serpent. Did the serpent speak a truth, or did he speak a lie? It's in the Bible, though. You see where I'm going with that. Just because it's in the Bible doesn't make it true. Only what God has said is truth. And see, this is the kind of thing that Solomon was doing. When we think about, yeah, that's convoluted, but this is what Solomon was doing. He was going through all of the wisdom of man, and he was seeking it out. And he wasn't just seeking it out. He was proving it true or false. So as he's doing all of these things, as he's gaining this wisdom of the world, he's going through and he's sifting through it, and he's not just getting it from the nations of Israel. All of these people who were coming to him from outside of the nation were bringing him all of this knowledge. And they're saying, but in our where I'm from, or in our culture, or in my religion, we believe this, we do this. Well, Solomon, to his shame, took many of those things and attempted to prove them either right or prove them wrong. Well, in order to prove it right or prove it wrong, what did he have to do? He had to engage in it. He had to do it. Solomon was guilty of a great many sins against the Lord because of his attempt to prove man's knowledge right or wrong. So he would indulge in it, he would engage in it, and then he found himself guilty with sin on him because of his desire to prove the wisdom of the world either true or prove it false. And this is what he's doing at this point. He's coming back and he's saying, I did all of this, and let me tell you, all of the wisdom of man, all of these things, it is all useless. It's all pointless. The wisdom of man is in many cases comes just directly from the intellect of man. Well, where's the intellect of man? Depends on where your heart is, right? That's what your heart is. That's what you're going to say. Well, what does that tell us about the wisdom of man? It comes from what's in his heart. It comes from what's in his mind. For the longest time, people believed crazy things about the medical profession, right? I mean, just crazy things. They did not believe for 1 second that cleanliness was necessary when treating a patient. So what happened? They got infections. Sepsis set in. Infections killed almost as many people in the Civil War as bullets did. I mean, people died mass casualties. Typhus would go through a camp and just destroy. Yellow fever, malaria, all of these things. Well, for the longest time, people didn't even believe there was anything small enough that they couldn't see. So they didn't even believe in germs. So that's conventional wisdom of man. Well, what did conventional wisdom of man end up doing? Cost lives. Years and years where people just would not believe that there was anything other than that. Getting back to the point, this is what Solomon's trying to do. And that's not what he's doing at this point, I'm sorry. He's giving an account of his attempt to do all of these things. He's looking back on it. What do they say about hindsight? 20/20. That's right. Better than 4. All the time we can look back and say, they should have done this. Should have done this. Man, Monday night, or on Monday, what is everybody talking about what happened Sunday night? They should have thrown the ball. They should have run this offense. They should have played this defense. They should have put this guy in. They should have put... That's armchair quarterbacks. This is what Solomon's doing at this point. He's saying, listen, I've done it all. I'm doing it so you don't have to. And I'm telling you, everything the man's dissatisfaction comes from man, not from God. If we, and getting back to the idea what Ms. Pat said about when we come away from God, what we've done is we've left that which will not dissatisfy us. We will always be satisfied with God. So when we think about the dissatisfaction that comes up in our life, it's because we've lost sight of something very important, and that is God. God's will, God's desire for us, God's commandments towards us. So, there you go. And this is what Solomon's coming. Part of his dissatisfaction is realizing that he's spent a lot of time away from the God that made him, and the God that put him into power, the God that gave him the wisdom that he had, that he would rule his people well. And he's gone away from this for years and years and years, and now he's coming back and he's expressing where his dissatisfaction came from, and that was being away from God himself. So, the idea, what's the point? What's the point to it all? All right? Well, the point is that we always want more. Dissatisfaction means what? That we're not satisfied with what we have. We either want something more or we want something different. I'd say maybe it's between 50-50 between the two. What do we do in order to address dissatisfaction in our lives? What are some of the things that we do to address that dissatisfaction? I mean, there's a lot, right? What's some of them? What's a couple of things that we might do? Correct it, right? Absolutely. We identify the problem. We identify where we're dissatisfied, and we address the problem. We correct it if it's possible to correct it. How many people has anybody here known somebody who's had a plastic surgery done? Somebody here know anybody that's had plastic surgery done? Not medically necessary plastic surgery, but plastic surgery to correct something, a flaw that they see in themselves. Anybody ever know anybody that done that? Nope. Nope. I consider that a necessity. I'm talking about like, exactly, a facelift, breast augmentation, all the stuff that you see. Has it ever happened just once? What happens with when people do stuff like that? It doesn't. It becomes because once we latch hold of one sense of dissatisfaction, what do we end up trying to do sometimes? We find more. We find it again, and we continue on, and we continue on. Oh, goodness gracious. I saw somebody said they tried, but this is what plastic surgery did. It changed Michael Jackson from a black man to a white woman. I mean, if you look at the pictures of him right before he died, he looked like a very disturbing looking white woman. I mean, he's changed completely. But you see people like that today, and some of them even brag about it. Joan Rivers bragged about how much plastic surgery she had. There's nothing on me that's not plastic. And that's just one example. There's so many other examples of dissatisfaction. What about extramarital affairs? Is that addressing a dissatisfaction? Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. Most men and women don't get up one day and say, you know what, it just seems like something to do. No, they do that because there's a dissatisfaction in their lives, and it manifests itself. And when an opportunity presents itself in the form of affection from somebody other than their spouse, this is their chance to address it. And studies show, believe it or not, that most people after they have that fling, that extramarital fling, most people are overwhelmed with a sense of guilt, remorse. It's a remorse. Because remorse meaning they know that they did something wrong, and they feel like they need to atone. That's why most people find out about affairs, because the guilt leads to remorse, and they tell on themselves. But that all boils down to a sense of dissatisfaction. How many people do you know have gone from church, from congregation to congregation, 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 and they've made the rounds of every congregation within a 20-mile radius of a town, because why? And you know what? Like we said, it's a sense. They're not. This dissatisfaction comes from within. So what are they doing? They're going to try to solve it using man's method. God never said, hey, you know what? If you're unhappy with the church, you just need to go somewhere else. That's not what he said. What did he say? If there's a problem with the church, what do you do within the church? You try to correct it. Well, I'm unhappy with this person, so I'm just going to leave and go somewhere else. Well, but you're not addressing the problem, right? Solomon didn't address the problem. He addressed dissatisfaction. I have a problem with the elders. I'm going to leave. Well, have you tried talking to the elders? Well, they're not going to listen to me. Okay? Exactly. Think about every other sense of this. Now there's some where there's a constructive type of behavior. I'm dissatisfied with my job. So what do? Do you just quit? No. You go try to find another job. You may say, hey, go to your supervisor and say, hey, what do I need to do to progress in my career? What do I need to do in order to further my career at this place? Sometimes they say, listen, right now this is about as far as you're going to go. You don't have the background, you don't have the education, you don't have the whatever. So even then, it still gives you an opportunity to do something. But that's a constructive way of approaching dissatisfaction. Solomon's sense of approaching dissatisfaction was go to the next big thing. Go to the next thing. Go to the next thing. Try to accumulate more wisdom. Listen to more people. And where did it get him in the end? It got him to a realization that everything that mankind is doing to address his dissatisfaction is pointless and it's futile. It's unfruitful. It's not going to happen. So, we always want more. We're always going to be dissatisfied if we're not looking for the right thing, if we're not looking after the right thing. And it wasn't until Solomon realized that he needed to come back to God and look for what God's intent was that his dissatisfaction, that itch that he couldn't scratch for however many years, for 40 years, it wasn't being alleviated. And it wasn't until he came back to God that he realized everything he'd been doing up until this point was futile. It just wasn't working. So what does that tell us about us? Where do we need to look to for satisfaction in our lives? Okay, what kind of wisdom do we need to look for? Do we look for man's wisdom? Where's man's wisdom ever gotten us? Nowhere. Even if it was a temporary fix, what's going to happen? Eventually it's going to what? It's like a Band-Aid, right? You ever known a Band-Aid that stayed on until you were ready to take it off? I mean, very rarely. Usually you have to reapply that thing 3 or 4 times because you take a shower, you do something, and it comes off again. Same thing with man's wisdom. It's a temporary Band-Aid to a very permanent problem that we have in the world, and that is the fact that the world is never going to satisfy us. We think it will, and men, listen, there are so many people who look to the world for satisfying an itch that they can't scratch. I mean, that's what most people do, don't they? What can the world do for me? And they don't think about it that way. They're just looking for an answer. They're looking for something to fulfill themselves. And as long as we do that, we're never going to be satisfied. Studies have shown, and I'm not going to go too far into it, but studies have shown that people, that especially men, because men are the largest consumers, that pornography, the idea of pornography never satisfies for very long. It always leads to something else. It leads to greater problems. And the lightweight, easy, what they call soft-core pornography almost inevitably leads to harder stuff. It no longer satisfies. It needs to be something else. Oftentimes, the idea of pornography no longer satisfies, and it manifests itself in other ways. It skews a vision of a relationship between man and woman. All of these things go on, but it all boils down to a sense of dissatisfaction. And what we do in order to alleviate that dissatisfaction. And we will look to the world if we're not looking to God. There's only 2 places that we can go, right? If we've got a problem, there are only 2 places where we can go for a solution. We can either go to God and His solutions for our problems, or we can go to the world. And once again, the idea of what the world is going to do for us and to us. Well, yeah, if it's not God, it's Satan. There is no neutral ground. If it's not God, it's from Satan. Does that mean that God has some solutions that we might not even think about? Sure, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. Being dissatisfied is not necessarily in and of itself a sin. We could be dissatisfied with a job. Does that mean we're in sin because we're not satisfied with a job? No. But what we have to do is look, what is God's attitude towards my dissatisfaction? Do I have the right to be dissatisfied, and what should I do about it? Do I have the right to be dissatisfied with my marriage? Yes. We have the right to be dissatisfied with our marriage. The question is, what are we going to do about that dissatisfaction? How are we going to address it? Do we address it by saying, well, you know what? This young lady at work has been, she's been really nice, and, I wonder, there shouldn't be any problem with me, talking to her and maybe going to get a cup of coffee after, you see where that slippery slope is. Same thing with women. That there's a guy, and, he treats me nice. My husband hasn't looked at me nice in 10 years. It doesn't matter. Okay? Do we have the right to be dissatisfied in our job? Yeah. But how do we go about doing it? Do we act out, or do we seek a path to better, a better job situation? Well, God has a hand in it, or He doesn't have a hand in it. One of the two. So, all right. Continue on just a little bit. All right. So the message of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes portrays the life under the sun. Under the sun, meaning of this earth. Not talking about the life. Not talking about a spiritual life. It's talking about the life that we live under the sun, the physical life that we live. And of course, it's a depressing picture, right? I mean, Solomon's not giving us much of a ray of sunshine here. He's giving us basically doom and gloom. And the reason is, it's a depressing picture because life without God is depressing. Whether the world wants to admit it or not, life without God is a depressing life. Why do you think it is that so many people who live in the world and really embrace the world are always looking for something else? Because life is, inevitably, it's going to be dissatisfaction, it's going to be depression. So that's what happens. So what's the good news in all this? We got, there's There's doom and gloom, but Solomon's also given us something a little bit more. Okay? The good news is this. It's that God has not left us under the sun forever, for an eternity. All right? For the Christian life, it's not life under the sun, but life with the sun. Now, sun, of course, S-U-N and S-O-N. Okay? As Christians, we have life with the sun. So what does that? How does that inform how we act as Christians when we find ourselves in the same way as Solomon, is that everything is vain, everything is futile? What does that tell us? You know, we said that life without, I'm sorry. What's that? We can what? Okay. It tells us where we need to go for satisfaction. It also tells us that what we are to be satisfied with. Sometimes that's easy, or I should say, sometimes that's hard, but when we're told, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit easier because we know what God's will is. Isn't it much better to know God's will than not know God's will and try to achieve it? You know, when God tells us what to do, it's a good thing that He tells us what we need to do. He doesn't tell us what to do and allow us to flounder around and try to find our own way. He says, this is what I want you to do. As Christians, God's told us what we need to do in order to be content. He says be content in whatever circumstances you find yourself with, but He also tells us how we're to be content. But how are we content as Christians? It's all well and good for Him to say, well, be content. How does He tell us to be content? Okay? And how do we do that? So it's not an immediate process, is it? It's not something it's zapped into us. You know, well, I wasn't satisfied 2 minutes ago, but you know what? Now I'm satisfied. He says, I've learned to be. And how has he learned to be satisfied? How did Paul learn to be satisfied? Okay. He made it a habit, right? You know, part of being a Christian is we do things, and on the surface, or at least at the very beginning, they seem very odd to us. They seem according to the way of the world, they seem counterintuitive. You know, we talk about how can we be satisfied unless we go after that which satisfies us. And God's saying, listen, you be satisfied, and the way you're satisfied is live with what you have. You know, that's kind of counterintuitive, but not according to God. Okay? So that's one way that we learn to be content with what we have. We learn satisfaction. What's another way? What's something else that kind of helps us achieve this sense of satisfaction? When we're around other people who are satisfied as well, right? You know, when people come to us and they ask our impression, they ask our opinion on what they need to do, what do we tell them? How do we inform them? Do we give them what they want to hear, or do we give them what they need to hear? What they need to hear. Is that easy? Is it always easy to hear what we need to hear? No. A lot of times it's not. But once again, that's a way in which we can achieve satisfaction, is when we're around people who are content and they are satisfied, and the answers that they get come from the Scriptures and God. Certainly a portion of it anyway. All right? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good one. Realize that what? That says number our days. What does that mean? Yeah. We realize, for one thing, I'll tell you what. I want to go ahead to chapter 2, because that goes right into it. That goes right into it. I'm sorry. I have to go slow because it's not wanting to. There it goes. Chapter 3. Not chapter 2, chapter 3. Chapter 3, and this is so well known, but we're going to read it for just a couple seconds, and it gives us an idea about making the days count. Everything has its time. Chapter 3, verse 1. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, and a time of war and a time of peace. Now, that all sounds very well and good, and it's probably one of the most well-known portions of Scripture. Probably one of the most well-known, because even people who don't really hew to the Scriptures will agree with what's being said there. When it says a time to, what's that? And there's a song by the Birds. What's the idea here is there is a time. What does it mean there is a time? See, because that's important for us to understand when we try to understand chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. What does that mean? Okay, there's a correct time to do these things. When it says time, what does that mean? Okay, all right. It means that what that tells us is that in all the times that we live, and all the years that we live, all the days that we live on this earth, we're going to undergo these things. We're going to go through these portions of our lives. And there's going to be many times where it's going to be time to laugh and a time to cry. There's going to be many times where it's time to embrace and time to refrain from embracing. Hopefully, there's not many about the idea of a time of war and a time of peace, but you know what? There is, because what are we often at war with? Not necessarily physical war, but we're a time of spiritual war. We're engaged in spiritual warfare. We're engaged in warfare between our souls and our bodies. Okay? So this concept here is that these are things that we all are going to go through, and we all must go through. Because if we can't go through all of these things, where are we going to be at the end of our lives? We won't have lived, for one. You can't have lived much if you haven't gone through the things that you're supposed to go through in order to live. It's the same concept of a child. You allow the child to make their mistakes so that they can grow. Yeah, absolutely. There are times that you try to keep them from making the same mistakes that you made, but they're still going to make them. Yeah, that's still going to happen as well. So this concept of all of these things, they're things that we are going to go through. There are the idea of time. There's a period in which all of us are going to undergo the things that we read about here in various ways. Not always the physical, but sometimes the spiritual aspect of the things that are mentioned here in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. So with the verse Ms. Sybil mentioned, the idea here of number our days, for one thing, realize that we have a finite period of time on this earth. And we need to make the very best of the time that we have on this earth. Do you think Solomon in all of this regretted spending his life the way that he did? A lot of his life the way that he did? You think he looked back and, when he talks about numbering his days, this is what he's doing for us in Ecclesiastes. He's numbering his days. I've done this. I did this. I engaged in this. And he's saying how much of a folly it was that he did some of the things that he did. And he's giving us the benefit of the wisdom that God bestowed upon him. And I'm thankful for that. But you know what? In spite of all that he's told me, I'm still going to do some of the things that he did. I'm still going to repeat some of the mistakes that he made. The idea of dissatisfaction, I know a lot of people have a dissatisfaction when they look back and they realize they spent too much time away from God. Maybe they came back to God at a later age, in their 20s and maybe their 30s. They fell away from the church and they lived their lives, maybe not just in excess, but they just lived. They weren't engaged with God the way they needed to be engaged. And sometimes it's when they get married, maybe when they start having kids, they realize, you know what? I remember how things were when I was a kid and I was in church and all this stuff, and all of a sudden they find themselves coming back. That's a sense of dissatisfaction. I want things to be better for my kids. I want things to be good for them. And all of a sudden they find themselves coming back to the church and engaging in all the earthly wisdom. Do you think they look back and think, I wasted so many years. I wasted so many years in not being a part and having a relationship with God that I should have had. That's exactly what Solomon did. I didn't have a relationship with my God the way I should have had a relationship with him. And there are so many people, so many members of the Lord's church who that's why they come back. There's a dissatisfaction there. So dissatisfaction is not wrong. It's how we deal with it. I don't like the way my life is. I'm going to blame God. Well, that's what a lot of people do. God hasn't blessed me the way I think he should, so I'm just going to go further away from it. They don't stop to think maybe he's not blessing you because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I don't know. Oh, absolutely. Become anti. It's funny, they don't become atheists. It's not that they quit believing in God. They're just so angry at God for the things that are going on in their lives that they will. Basically, they in some cases, they flat out curse God. They want nothing to do with him because of the dissatisfaction in their lives. So like I said, there's beneficial, there's constructive and destructive ways in which we deal with our satisfaction. Solomon's was to, unfortunately, continue down that rabbit hole and eventually realize that his life was not where it should be, and he came to his senses. All right, we'll stop there. Any questions? This is a difficult book, is it not? Almost as difficult as Leviticus because it doesn't fit the format that we're used to. It's not a narrative in the way that we read much of the books like Kings and Chronicles where this is the event and this is what happened and this is what happened. It just doesn't flow like that. Like I said, this is more of a memoir that Solomon's writing to himself and to the congregation. He calls himself preacher because he's talking to the children of Israel. He's saying, folks, this is what I've done. This is what I've been doing for the past 40 years, and I've realized that everything that I was engaged in is pointless. You know, he's kind of giving them a heads up. Listen, don't fall away from God because this is where you'll be. Don't waste that much time of your life and become dissatisfied. Continue in your walk with God, and things will be much better for you than they were for him. He was insulated, though, if you think about it. He was insulated from a lot of the things that might have happened because of his wealth and his position. I can't imagine a normal human being in his time having the ability to do what he did. Maybe that's one of the reasons that God gave him, to use him as a tool, to show people what life without him is really like. So, okay. Any else? Okay. I appreciate everybody's comments. And if, as we do every time we come together, if